Hi everyone, it's Nutribell with Burr here, and this is week 3 of our ultra processed food challenge. Hope you're all enjoying these short videos. And today we're going to talk about emulsifiers. So let's crack on. Whoops. So emulsifiers are substances that help mix two liquids that normally don't combine, like oil and water. So if we look at mayonnaise here, this is the non-emulsified mayonnaise, which doesn't look very appealing, does it? So you possibly wouldn't buy that if you saw that in the store, but if you saw this one, yes, yummy, everybody would jump for joy and go off with a bottle of that in their shopping trolley. And so how does the emulsifier work? Well, basically, it's a chemical that has a hydrophobic, which is water heating, and a hydrophilic, which is water loving, two ends, and they help combine the oil and the water through this chemical substance. And then it forms an emulsion. Then it goes through an aggregation process, and then if we're talking about mayonnaise, then that has to be pasteurized to make sure there's no bacteria um, due to health regulations, and also we all want that at 72 degrees. This is what Heinz do. And then you're landed up with the mayonnaise, which you can transport across the world and has a longer shelf life and meets the regulations for eating. It meets the regulations for the amount of emulsifiers that are in it, because it is strictly regulated in the EU. So there are about 60 additives which are classed as emulsifiers permitted in the EU. Some of the most common ones are lecithin, monoglyceride, polysorbate, carrageenan, mustard. There are lots of others I mentioned in the first video. And then we find them in all sorts of foods, some of the yummiest foods like ice cream, mayonnaise, chocolate, caramel, margarine, bread, biscuits, cakes. So it's watching out for these in foods. So how does it affect our health? Well, emulsifiers especially these ones, carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate, have been lots of research done on these, and they have a real negative impact on our gut microbiome, destroying the good bacteria and promoting the pathogenic, the bad bacteria. So there are 18 others which have been tested and all have a similar impact. But then it says here that some positive ones, such as lecithin, doesn't have that negative impact, or acai gum wouldn't have the same detrimental impact and may have positive impacts on the gut microbiome. Again, this is another research study looking at emulsifiers on the bowel and metabolic health, and what they found was it caused alteration of the gut microbiome, disruption to the intestinal mucosal layer, contribute to increased permeability of the intestinal layer, so they're basically putting large holes in the intestinal layer so that they're not those microscopic holes where vitamins and minerals and substances from our food that we need to absorb can get through. But when the large holes are poked through in the gut lining, it makes it what we call a leaky gut. So imagine those large holes. They allow food to go in, they allow bacteria to go in, which would be pathogenic, but bacteria has no place going in anyway into our bloodstream. Toxins, heavy metals, all of those sorts of things, and that's why that gut barrier lining is very important for health and keeping levels of inflammation low. It promotes translocation of the bacteria, which I talked about, going into the bloodstream. This results as low-grade inflammation, glucose intolerance, risk of irritable bowel disease, and obviously risk of diabetes because of the glucose intolerance. Food additives, this is another paper looking at food additives, the emulsifier, with the risk of cancer. Now, this study was done in a French study of 92,000 adults. 78% of those were women, and they did it from 2009 to 2021. They did it for over 6.5 years, and then obviously because it showed that carrageenan and monodiglycerides increase the risk of breast and prostate cancer, the study would have to be stopped. And it also did say at the end of the study that this study would have to be replicated you know, for more information to understand really how emulsifiers negatively affect our health and cancer. So that's those 3 studies. There's lots of studies on this. Oops, sorry. So now we're looking at what actually happens in the gut. So taking a closer look. So this is what I just want to show you what a healthy gut lining looks like over here. So you can see all this. So this, imagine this is your small intestine, where most of our absorption of all those minerals and vitamins take place. And so you can see it's all nice and tight here, but when you go over here, there are gaps. So if we move across here to what the emulsifiers do, so all these kind of foods where you find emulsifiers, things that people don't want to give up, that are quite addictive, and particularly these ones is what, from this study that they looked at, the carboxymethyl cellulose, polysorbate 80, lecithin, polysorbate carrageenan, and agar gums. They cause a dysbiotic gut. So basically, again, we talked about the weeds in the garden as a good analogy for this. Where there are too many weeds, too many of the pathogenic bacteria, which cause, like E. coli, which cause inflammation, they cause gas, bloating. And then there's so much fewer of the healthy bacteria, which are beneficial for us. They can produce B vitamins and have many other functions. Then as a result of this dysbiosis, this can cause what they call the leaky gut. So you have decreased mucus production. So there's a decreased mucus layer, and that's important for protecting the cell wall so that those pathogenic bacteria can get through, or other toxins. And then there's also these tight junctions are no longer there. You can see there's large gaps. So now that's where the translocation of the pathogenic bacteria come through here. And then, so if you consider those pathogenic bacteria down here, they're called LPS. They are going to be smoldering. So they are like a fire smoldering, releasing smoke constantly. So if you think of that, small amount of smoke constantly. So if there's a fire in your room and it's a very small fire, eventually the house is going to fall down. So if you think about the LPS, the lipopolysaccharides, they're gram-negative bacteria, which are highly inflammatory. They're like that smoke in the room, and the room eventually burns down because nobody has come. So then a signal is sent off to our immune system over here. So because if you think the LPS have that smoke, that's the smoke, and now it activates TLR, toll-like receptors, which if you think of the toll-like receptors as the fire alarm, is set off, right? That's not really the sound of a fire alarm, but it's pretty rubbish. So then they then also trigger another response, which is NF-kappa beta, which is now the fire brigade is coming, that's better. And they come, so activating the immune system further to kind of calm down that response, inflammation from the LPS, so the smoke in the room. So this is and then this is continuous vicious cycle, because if we continually eat these foods, then we're going to constantly have those gaps. We're going to constantly have leaky gut, the dysbiotic gut, where there's an imbalance in the gut bacteria, and it's never going to heal. So if you think of it like that, and then the fire brigade is constantly coming out because there are no bouncers here to block those bad guys coming in. So the fire brigade comes constantly coming out. They become exhausted because the immune system is overactivated. So it's constantly overactivated. So we get into like an autoimmune response that triggers a higher level of blood sugar, because we also trigger a stress response in the body through the release of cortisol from our adrenal glands. So a message goes from the hypothalamus to the adrenals through a mechanism of other hormones, and then that's telling us there's inflammation in the body. So stress response, cortisol is released, that increases blood sugar, and then we have now we have the inflammation, increased blood sugar, and now the risk of obesity, because we're now inflamed. We're also eating foods that are highly palatable, so we're eating more and more of them. We're not monitoring it. And we have this vicious cycle where now we end up with metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, mental health disorders like depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and the list goes on, including cancer. So I hope that, I'm sorry for wobbling on, but I hope that actually helps a little bit. So now quickly, I'm going to go on as to how we can reduce the amount of emulsifiers in our diet. You can make your own mayonnaise. There's a very good recipe, lots of really easy recipes, basically just eggs, oil, water, eggs, oil, and salt, and then whatever flavorings some people like to add, chili or whatever, and mustard obviously goes in. So it's very simple, and you can make it yourself. I don't particularly love mayonnaise, so it's not something I would actually go for. It's not popular in my house either. So other options would be just a balsamic vinegar and olive oil, extra virgin olive oil dressing, very easy. Add some fresh herbs to it. Another one would be balsamic vinegar with lemon and Dijon mustard. That makes a yummy dressing. You can add some dill to it if you like. Another one would be farge yogurt. It doesn't have to be zero fat, just you can use whatever percentage you want. Lemon juice and any of the parsleys. So basically just showing you how easy it is to move away from something which you might be using a couple of times a day, which kind of adds to the level of the amount that accumulates in your body or in your GI tract, causing that constant low grade inflammation, causing that constant smoke. If we think about the smoke being released and causing, disease and a decline in our health. So we want to actually try and get those down to as low as possible or eliminate them completely. So that's all I'm going to say today on our challenge. I hope you're enjoying all these little videos, and I hope they're helpful for you to understand some of the mechanisms at play. I can get myself into a bit of a hole when I'm trying to explain things, but I try to explain things in simple terms so it makes it easier for you to visualize what's actually happening when somebody talks about emulsifiers, because I don't think there's much point in saying get rid of emulsifiers. We don't really understand what's happening in our body and how we might have, a pain in our shoulder, bad back, bad knees, rosacea, cold hands and feet, bloating, gas, constipation, all of those things. Everything stems from the gut. And if we don't get the control on a good regulation on those pathogenic bacteria, reducing the numbers and increasing the numbers of the good bacteria, we're never going to come out of a disease state, and our body is always going to feel stressed. And when our body feels stressed, we release more cortisol, and then that spikes glucose, and then the knock-on effect of all of that is weight gain, inflammation, and disease. So thank you very much for watching. Please share with friends. I'd love if you liked and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and I'll be back again next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.